looks like I have a couple viewers there. Hello, Fran in St. Louis Park. Glad that you are here with me. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to start just with a welcome. If I'm repeating myself, my apologies, but I do just want to let you know that you have joined me on the Encaustic Edge, which is my new Encaustic YouTube channel. And today we're going to do an encaustic demonstration, and I'm going to start with a short history of encaustic. Encaustics are very old. They come from the Greeks and the Egyptians. The Greeks used to seal their ships with the encaustic medium, or at least beeswax. Beeswax is a natural desiccant, so it preserves and it makes anything that it covers watertight. And so for the ships, it worked really, really well to fill all the little crevices and holes between the boards. What the Greeks discovered is that later on they could add things like charcoal or ochre or iron, and they could make color using natural pigments with the beeswax. So once they discovered that, then they were just off to the races, and they would take those colored pigments and they would paint on their pottery, they would paint on their ships. Things got a lot more decorative after that. The Egyptians would use the encaustic to paint portraits. Family was very, very important to the Egyptians, and they liked to kind of show off their family to others. They were very social, so they would hire artists to paint their portraits in the encaustic medium, and then they would hang those paintings up in their homes as kind of a decoration, and to, just like we do today with photographs, we would photograph our families and hang them in our homes and kind of mark the stages of time or whatever it was. But what else they would do with these portraits that they would create is then when members of their family would pass, then they would go ahead and those portraits would go into their tombs with them as death masks. So if you were to go online and type in Egyptian encaustics, you're going to come up with these, with these really beautiful portraits that were done by the Egyptians. So they're really gorgeous, and I highly recommend that you go ahead and check those out, because they're just stunning. And to think about the materials that they were using, it really is pretty miraculous what they were able to achieve. So I wanted to just say a quick hello to Suzanne from Maple Grove, Minnesota. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, you've joined the Encaustic Edge, which is my new YouTube channel. And I am doing this through heartfulartists.com, which is a new virtual gallery that I helped to start with my friend Barbara Jacobs, who's an artist in Sebastopol, California. So I want you guys to go ahead and feel free to type in any questions as I go along in the chat area, and then I will stop in between portions of my demonstration, and I will be able to answer your questions. Or if you have comments or anything, maybe you've seen this done before and you've seen it done differently, whatever it is, I am completely open to it. So I've given you a little bit of a history about encaustic, but what exactly is encaustic? Encaustic is a combination of two ingredients. It is beeswax, which this is beeswax in kind of a pellet form, and you can also buy it in blocks. But this is the natural medium that occurs when the bees are making their honey in their hives. If you've ever seen honey being made by the bees and they pull out the big tray, you'll see all the little holes. Or if you've ever eaten a honeycomb, you squeeze out all the honey in your mouth and you're left with a big wad of wax in your mouth. So that's what this is, and it's cleaned and refined. You can buy it bleached, but mine is just natural, and it comes in yellow and this white color. So beeswax has a melting point of about 100 degrees, and that's a really low melting point. So if I were to paint just with plain beeswax, and since I live in California, say I left my painting in my car in the summertime, when I came back to my car, I may not have a painting left if I painted with just straight beeswax. So what we do to make the encaustic medium is we add Damar resin. Damar resin is, here I'm going to hold it in my hand so you can see it. Damar resin is a tree sap that comes from a deciduous tree in East Asia, and they tap the tree just like they would a maple tree. They actually make a V formation in the bark, and the sap runs down the tree into the collection pot. When the liquid cools or dries, it becomes this crystal form. Now what the Damar resin does for the beeswax is it raises the melting point. So Damar resin melts at about 200 degrees. And so when you pop the Damar resin into the beeswax and melt it together, then you end up with the encaustic paint. This is the base. The clear encaustic medium is the base for all encaustic paint. And just by adding that Damar resin, you've raised that melting temperature to about 200 to 25 degrees. So another thing that the Damar resin does is that it adds structure to the beeswax and gives it, makes it harder over time, right? So the beeswax, even when it's in its hardened state, is still pretty soft. I can kind of warm it with my hands and kind of smash it around, but this is hard, and it makes the beeswax harder. So when I make my paint, I melt the Damar resin first. I crush it into a crystal form and throw it into my hot pot, and then I heat it at about 200 degrees. And when this is melted, it kind of melts into this really gooey, sticky mass. Because this isn't cleaned before I melt it, sometimes I'll find bits of bark or little bugs or hairs or whatever in the Damar resin, but that's okay. Then I throw my beeswax in and I melt that all together. Once it's all combined and melted, then I will take a piece of cheesecloth and put it over the top of a pot and take what the melted form in my pan and pour it into the pot, reheat the pot, and then I can pour it into molds and then pop up those molds when I need to. So by siphoning off all of the dirt and junk and bugs and bark, I end up with a nice clean encaustic medium. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my melted version over so you can see. So it looks kind of dark. So there you can see the encaustic medium is clear and in its molten form. So I can't really make all of these beautiful colors without adding something to that encaustic medium. So what I use is, let me find it. This is dry pigment. So it's a powder. I'm trying to give you the best angle. So it's a powder form, and this is a metallic blue, really pretty, and I add that by the spoonful into the clear encaustic medium and stir it up, and then it becomes a color. So the really nice thing about making my own color is that I can combine any of my dry pigments together to make a color, or once it's in its molten form, I can also blend those and make new colors as well. If you don't want to make your own paint, you can buy it. And it comes in, this is a Mission Red color by Miles Conrad, who is a really famous encaustic painter and designer. and he makes his own colors, and they're beautiful and rich and lovely. You can also buy them in these larger blocks. This is, and they come in different sizes. I wanted to show you just the different sizes. So this is made by R&F Encaustic, a really well-known company in the encaustic world. You can check out their website. They have a lot of really valuable information about encaustic and about their paints and how to set up your own studio and that sort of thing. It also, you can get them in these teeny tiny little sticks. This is Encausticos, which is also another encaustic paint company. So this is, what color is this? This is maroon. And so lots of different formats where you can buy your encaustic. I choose to make my own encaustic because of the amount of painting that I do. I end up saving a lot of money, but I will from time to time if I'm looking for a specialty color that I don't want to, buy the pigment for. I'll actually go in and buy, or if I get lazy, sometimes I'll do that too. I'm just going to take a minute. Oh my goodness. So I've got lots of visitors. Thank you for coming and joining me on the Encaustic Edge. Hello to Lynn. Thank you. She likes my apron. This is my new apron that my mom gave me for my birthday. And I've got Sherry, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but thank you for joining me from Windsor, California. And I think it's Kay. I'm not sure. I've got Mom Mac. Oh yeah, that's my aunt watching from New Hampshire. So thank you, and again for joining me. Shout out any kind of questions or comments that you have, and I'll stop and we'll have a little conversation. So I'm just going to go ahead and move forward. I've kind of described to you how the encaustic paint is made, and then also how I mix the colors with the dry pigments. And I'm just going to do 5 little seconds. Hang on 1 minute. Sorry, I'm in my garage. This is where my studio is, and it was getting a little loud outside, so I didn't want any distractions. So at any rate, I laid these out just to kind of give you an overview of some of the really wonderful things that you can do with the encaustic medium. So basically, these are just different substrates. So substrates are the surface areas that you paint on top of. Normally I paint on cradle board, which is, this is not a birch panel, this is a masonite panel, but a birch panel, and then it has here, I'll show you, this is a bigger one over here. So there's a birch panel, and then it's got a large cradle that supports the birch panel, and that's what I would paint on. This is a small cradled masonite panel. And then you can also paint on just flat boards without any cradle on the back side. I normally use these for demonstrations and for classes so that I can show people how to do different things on the boards. You can also paint on paper. This is an example of just a little bit of paint on paper. Painting on paper is a whole other bag of tricks, and so you fuse differently, you prepare it differently, but it's really fun. And then after your painting is done, you want to rush off and make sure that you mount it, because if I were to bend this, it would crack and break. It's really, really fragile. Another thing that you can paint on is unglazed ceramics, clay, porcelain, plaster of Paris. Any of those would work, so long as you would want to not fuse it, but put it in the kiln and prepare it that way, and so that it would be ready and not be chipping and breaking, and then you can paint over the surface area of that. And then once you've painted, there's lots of different things that you can do to the encaustic paint. You can embed objects. These objects are, do I have any guesses out there what what these might be. They are, you know, when you wrap a present or you prepare an Easter basket or something like that, you have those crunchy little pieces of paper. That's what those are, those little crunchy things that you put in gifts and Easter baskets. So those were all individually coated with the encaustic paint and then embedded into the surface area of the painting. And then this is an example of a painting that I used it's the same kind of tool that you would use for wood burning, but this is kind of a different process where I use the same tool, but I would put a paper towel on top of the encaustic, and then I would use the heating tool and actually extract the wax with the heating tool. And then I go in with either, you can use lots of different media, but in this case, I used India ink to rub over the entire surface area of painting, and then take steel wool and rub off the excess. And you can rub off as much or as little as you want, and then you end up with this really beautiful texture on the surface area. You can also, of course, create your own texture by cutting and carving into the wax, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So I wanted to just mention really quick how important it is to have really good ventilation while you are painting with the encaustic medium. While the paint itself is not toxic in any way, while it is warming, it does there are particles coming off of your hot plate as it's warming, and so it is really important to have that ventilation, have that airflow moving through your studio. The other thing you need to be really careful of is maintaining a temperature of 200 degrees on your hot plate. So I have on all of my hot plates a surface temperature gauge, just like this one, and I just need to make sure that it's not going above that 200 marker, because if it starts going above that, then I risk my paints actually burning, and that's when the medium becomes very dangerous. It will not only ruin all of your paints, but the vapors that enter the air at that point are very dangerous, and the particulates can lodge into your lungs and make you really sick. So we don't want to do that. We always want to have really good ventilation in the studio. So if you're thinking of starting your own studio, you need to either be in a situation like I am, where you can open doors and windows and let the air through, or, sorry, I got somebody air blowing outside. If you can hear that, my apologies. If you're inside and you want to start your own studio, if you are not near, if you can't paint directly near an open window, you need to get some sort of a venting system. Some sort of a venting system. So, that being said, let's move on. Again, my apologies for the noise. That'll go away soon. And so thanks again for joining me. I'm just sorry, I'm looking around my computer here really quick. Let's see. So I wanted to now go into finding my cursor, and I want to walk you through the steps of painting. Okay, so the first thing that I would do is I would get my panel out, and thank you, Suzanne. I'm glad you can still hear me. I can barely hear me. Let's see, get this situated here. So this is just a plain birch encaustic cradle board, so you can see the cradle on the back. And if I were going to paint on this, I definitely would want to preserve my nice, pristine, natural wood sides, or I would go ahead and finish the sides first before painting. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through the process of taping the sides. Because when I tape the sides for an encaustic painting, it's a little different than when you're taping off for like an acrylic or an oil painting. So what I'm going to do is, you can see the length of the board. This is I think an 8x8 board. So I'm going to start my tape a little more than halfway past the halfway point, and I'll tell you the reason for that in just a minute. There you go. Everything's backwards on my screen. I'm getting used to that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start taping at the halfway point. Sorry, I have to stand up. And I'm not going to tape all the way to the edge. I'm going to leave, you can see, I'm leaving just a little bit of space between the top of the board and the top of my tape. And the reason for that is when I go to take that tape off, and I'm pulling down and away from my painting, if I tape all the way to the top, chances are that I'm probably going to pull off some of the encaustic paint that I worked so hard to apply to my board. So I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to tear off the tape. I'm just going to keep taping. And there's a reason that I don't tear off each section. And that has to do with cleaning the sides as I go along. And I'm going to show you in just a minute when I get to the end. So here I'm just not really concerned about my distance too much. But okay, so here, that's where I started. I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to keep going around my board with my tape all the way to the other side to just past the halfway point again. Oops. Okay, so the reason that I went past that halfway point is when I am painting, I'm going to end up, I'll show you on this one, I'm going to end up with these drips all down the side of my painting. And while I'm painting, in order to keep my bottom part flat and level, I'm going to take one of my carving tools and I'm going to want to trim the side of that painting. And if I am trimming and I say I hit, all right, where to go? Say when I'm trimming, I hit the beginning of my tape line. If I hit it and I'm scraping, I may end up scraping off not only some of the wax, but I may end up scraping some of the tape as well. And if I scrape that tape, I'm going to end up with tape underneath, so I'm safe and I don't have to worry about it. If I started scraping on this side, and this was the end of the line, I'd end up exposing my board, and that would be a problem. So that is the reason. There's always a method behind my madness, even if it's not obvious right away. At any rate, I have a quick question out here from Barbara Jacobs, who, darn, she thought it was at 11 o'clock. Will there be a replay? So this is automatically recording, according to all the research that I did. And I will go ahead and make this live and optional, something you can plug into later and rewatch if you want to. So yes, Barbara, I hope there will be a replay. I've got, thank you, Catherine Davis, watching from beautiful Minnesota. Thank you for joining me. And I'm so glad you can hear me. That was a concern. So let's move on. So on the back of the board, I've got just a little remainder of tape, and I'm going to go ahead, just like I'm wrapping a present, working opposite sides. It's not as critical right now that I work those opposite sides, but when I start working larger, and I have more tape on the back, it will become more critical, because I want to keep these this back side as even and flat as possible, because I don't want to I don't want to paint on a wonky surface. I want it to be nice and flat. All right, so I showed you those. I'm going to move those away. Oh, let's see. All right, so we are at we've got our sides prepped. We're ready to start painting. I'm super excited to show you guys. So with Encaustic, basically what the art form is on your board is it is thin layers of the encaustic paint and heat. Paint, heat, paint, heat, so on and so forth. Every time I heat, I'm not just heating that top layer, I'm heating every subsequent layer that I've put down. So the tool that I use for heating is, you can use two different things. You can either use a hot air gun, which I have, but I don't use, or a torch. So you can use a butane torch or a propane torch. The propane torch is really large, so I'm not going to use the propane torch. It's really loud too. You won't be able to hear me over it. The butane torch, so what you do is you buy the can and the head separately, and then you just put them together. So pretty easy. So the reason my choice is the torch rather than the hot air gun is when I am heating, I'm not just, the torch and the air gun, they blow out both heat and air. Because I'm dealing with a molten surface, I want to heat it, but I don't really want to move it right away. And so I feel I have a bit more control with the torch than I do with the hot air gun. Just by its name, hot air gun. I'm getting a lot more air with the hot air gun than I am with the torch. So I have a bit more control. If I wanted to go in with the hot air gun at any given time, I could do that. But it takes a while for the tip to cool down. It's a patience thing with me too. So it really is, you will meet artists out there who use both, who use one or the other. It's just personal taste. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna warm the board. Because encaustic is in a molten state when you're painting with it, it is affected by the weather, and it is currently about 45 or 50 degrees in my studio right now, which is pretty cold. And so it's going to behave very differently today than it would, say, on a hot summer day when it's 85 or 90 degrees outside and the air is moving through here at that temperature. So so by heating the board, I'm preparing the board to accept the molten wax. Another thing that I'm doing is that there's air trapped in the cellular structure of the board. And so by heating it, I'm kind of coaxing that air to come out before I seal it with wax. Sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. So we'll just have to see what kind of a board we've got going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and start my torch, and you should still be able to hear me over it. I did a dry run of this, and I could still be heard. I can still hear myself. Right now I'm just going to kind of run the heat over the top of the board. I could choose to burn the board a little bit if I wanted to as a design feature. Oh, sorry, I got a little bit right there. Up in there. Too busy talking. Need to pay attention to what I'm doing. At any rate, I can torch a little bit of the board if you want to see what that looks like. So just burning it ever so slightly to create some kind of a pattern on there before I put down my clear encaustic medium. Nothing crazy, not starting fires. So it's better when you're burning your design to go over it several times rather than trying to burn it all at once. So that's good enough. So there you see I've got a nice little burn mark there. And now I'm going to go ahead and start with my encaustic paint. I always go with the grain first on my first layer, and then I turn it and go against the grain. So the reason that I do that is to try and trap any area that, say, my brush stroke missed on that first run through. I'm going to do 3 to 4 layers of the clear encaustic medium on this board before I can start painting. Some artists will start with an encaustic gesso, which is the same idea as gessoing a canvas before you paint, starting with that bright white background. If I were doing something really kind of luminescent, or something that was a little bit more translucent rather than opaque, which is what I'm going to do today, I might choose to do the encaustic gesso, but I feel like I can do exact same thing just by laying down a layer of white encaustic before I start painting, and I still get that really luminous feel when I'm laying objects in or adding layers. So just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, this is a painting that I did, and this did not start with encaustic gesso. It started just with the raw board. The design that you can see in the background here, that was actually burned directly into the board before I started painting with layers of clear. And then you've got all sorts of color and embedded objects and collage and stencil that are also embedded into that clear encaustic medium, and it gives it what a lot of my students like to refer to as that floaty look. So in encaustic terms, we would say it has, this luminosity or this translucence. So you can see these different layers, and this is part of what I really, really love about this medium. It's what initially drew me to it, and that is that when you're looking at the artwork, you really don't know which layer you're looking at. There's kind of like this mystery to it, which really I'm like very near and dear to my heart. So Suzanne, thank you. I'm glad you like the painting. So then by kind of, to give you a difference, so this one is much more opaque. The colors are much more dense, and so I didn't really, there's no worry about, even though I've got layers going on in here as well, I wasn't as concerned about that luminosity or that translucency. These are layers that were cut through, that were carved, that were filled, and it has lots of clear encaustic medium on it, just to kind of acting as a buffer between those layers. But to the naked eye, to someone who's not trained in this, it would look like all one cohesive piece. So that gives you kind of an idea of that. Let's get back to painting. So I've got my board, and I'm going to go ahead and paint. You can't see the can, but what I'm going to do is, let's see if I can get it online for you. I'm going to go ahead and take my paintbrush, and I'm going to dab it off the side a couple of times before I start painting to get any excess drips off. But I won't do a lot of that, because the minute I take my brush out of the minute I take it out of the can, it starts cooling and hardening, especially on a day like today where it's much, much colder. So I'm not going to paint with that one because it was too hard. I was talking too long. So I'm going to start on not the very edge of my board, but I'm going to start just a little bit inside that edge. And the reason that I do that is I start there and I push the paintbrush down, which basically squeezes that paint to the edge. If I started on the very edge, I would end up wiping off most of my paint all over the side of my substrate, which doesn't help. So it looks like the cold today is forcing me to get more paint on my brush every time. It's just cooling too quickly. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm painting all in the same direction, and I'm not too concerned. There are a couple areas, and I think you can see with the light, a couple areas on the edge here where you can still see the board, where the wax didn't completely cover that edge. I'm not going to worry too much about those edges right now because these are my first couple of layers. I'm going to go ahead and leave it the way it is, and it'll get covered in the next couple of layers. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse this. So every time I put down a layer, I have to fuse it, which means I'm heating it. And what I'm looking for on these initial runs of fusing is I'm looking for the board. It's going to kind of brighten. I'm going to almost see the wood for what it is. It'll get this warm, nice yellow birch color to it. And I'm also looking for the lines that were created by my brush to even out and become flat. So let's go ahead and do that. So I start from one corner and I work in small circles. You see that brightening of the board as I'm moving across it? I don't want to stay in any area too long or I risk burning the paint and making a big hole in my painting. So I'm paying attention to the distance of my torch from the board and how quickly I'm moving across the board. So there. Didn't take very long at all. These areas that I was talking about, most of them have filled up, and they definitely will fill up on my next run through with the clear encaustic medium. So normally I would be working on anywhere from 3 to 5 paintings at once. While the paint is cooling, it's still pretty hot. I need to wait before I can continue to paint on it. Basically, it's going to start to kind of cloud over a little bit, and then I'll be able to paint on it again. So these first couple of layers that I'm putting on here, these are really, really crucial layers. Basically, what's happening when I'm painting onto the surface area, and then I'm fusing them and using that heat, what I'm telling the wax to do is I'm saying grab on really, really tightly. If I don't fuse these properly, and then I go and I paint my picture on there, or I do my designing, or I say I embed something on there or whatever, and say I drop it on the ground or I bang it on the corner or something like that, I risk the whole painting popping off, or at least a good chunk of it. So these first couple of layers, even though they're pretty unexciting, they're really, really important. So I'm just looking at the chat. I don't know, maybe I need to scroll down and see if there's any new questions or anything like that. No, I think I'm at the bottom. So again, if you're seeing anything you're confused about or you want more information, just let me know. Pop it up there in the chat. But it looks like you guys are all clear so far. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is fine for demonstration's sake for me to go ahead and do that next layer. You saw that I turned the board, so now my the board's surface is vertical rather than horizontal. So I'm going to go ahead and paint the other direction across. I might be able to escape and get 2 brush strokes in now. There we go. So the reason that I start with clear encaustic rather than a color paint, the clear encaustic is cheaper. It doesn't have any pigment in it, and so it's because most of the job that it's doing is to absorb into the wood. If I was using a colored paint, all that color would kind of go to waste because all it's doing is settling into the board. So the clear encaustic medium does its job, and I can still see, I still have a way to figure out if there's enough on there before I start painting, and I can tell if it's soaking into the wood or not, and it's a lot less expensive. The really important portion of this clear encaustic medium is, say I was using a different color every time I put down that first layer, I would lose track of what color that was. And then when I go in and I start my painting and I decide to carve into that color, all of my other colors underneath are going to show up. But then when I hit clear, I know I'm getting really, really close to the wood. So that is kind of my indicator to stop. So it acts kind of as a buffer zone that I don't need to remember because I know I use clear every single time. And it also does its job to have that painting cling to the board. So I've got my second layer on there. I'm going to go ahead and fuse that. You can see I maybe got a little glompy here with some of that clear encaustic medium. It doesn't matter because when I heat it, it's all going to just kind of flow together. So I paint in small circles as I move across the board. I pick a corner and I work from edge to edge. Sometimes, depending on the size of the board, I might start from the middle and work my way out. It's just really important to remember where you start so that you do the whole board. When the board is smaller, it's not as obvious because I can see the whole surface area of my board. But I just finished a 48 by 48 inch cradle board, and you can't really clearly see your entire board when you're painting it and when you're fusing it. So you have to either hit it in the angles or whatever to make sure that you're fusing that whole surface area. So sub artists will do more of a sweeping motion. If you go on YouTube and look at other encaustic demonstrations, you'll see a lot of artists doing this kind of a motion rather than this movement. And again, it's just a personal choice. It might be the way that you were taught. It might just be kind of personal preference. That's kind of what I chalk it up to. So once I have 3 layers of the clear encaustic medium on here, I can start to paint on it. I'm gonna just it's still a little warm, but I can get away with it. So I'm just gonna pop one more layer of clear encaustic medium on here and fuse that so that we can get to the fun part, the color. So when I paint, I blend a lot of my colors, create my shapes, and work out the design totally on my substrate. Some artists will blend and make all of their colors on their palettes, but I really love the interplay that takes place on the board itself. So here I'm going to go ahead and fuse my clear one more time. Still getting a bit of that brightening of the board, which is awesome because I know that this board really is thirsty and is welcoming my wax with open wooden arms. If I kept putting layers of clear down, I'd see less of that brightening and more of this kind of clouding that you're seeing. The clouding is natural, and as the wax cools and hardens over time, that clouding will disappear. Because it's an organic substance, it does take 18 months for the encaustic paint to cure, and that doesn't mean that you can't continue to paint on it or that you can't hang it on your wall or get it framed or whatever. The curing process for the encaustic medium basically means that it's getting sturdier. The structure is getting toughened and harder for it to any damage to take place. Another thing to note is that sometimes as it's curing, you will see a little bit more clouding like this, and it's really easy to get rid of. You just take a lint-free cloth with no seams, and don't wear jewelry. You take off your rings or bracelets or whatever, and you just want to give your painting a soft little buffing, just kind of wiping it in small circles. It creates a really beautiful shine on the encaustic surface, and all of that bloom should disappear. So, all right, let's go ahead and get to the color portion. Let's good that it's a cool day today because I don't have to wait very long in between to start adding my color. So I have a whole palette of color here. I've got blues and greens and yellows and pinks and reds and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with white just because I get a really beautiful, when I start adding other color on top of the white, you'll see, I'm going to get some really beautiful change in the color in the way that the paint likes to open up on top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and go over these edges a little bit where I missed them. So you can see I'm just doing one layer at a time, and that's really, really important as well. If I were to do a thick layer of wax, and even if I fused it, it would be wanting to flatten out, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that that base area of the thickness is actually clinging to the wax underneath it. So it's just a little bit more dangerous, and it's not something that we do in the encaustic world. All right, I'm going to go ahead and fuse this. You're going to see the wax, the white paint mostly will become opaque, and it will become shiny and flat. In some of the areas where the paint is thinner, you'll see it start to open up, like in these areas here, and that's just because I'm putting it on a layer of clear. I'm going to go ahead and add another layer of the white encaustic paint to make it more opaque. If I wanted to, but I wouldn't because I don't have enough paint on the board yet, I could move the paint around a little bit at this point, but it's really, really risky because I only have 4 layers of paint on my board right now. So if I start trying to move it with the heat, chances are I'm going to hit the wood really, really quickly. So I'm going to keep putting my layers of paint on it. I'm going to do another layer of white, and then we'll do some more color. So at this point, it is not critical for me to keep shifting my board. You can no longer see the grain of the wood, and so it's not as important for me to be shifting and turning it. I could potentially, if I was concerned about texture or something like that, for example, let's see, oh here. So if I had laid down some sort of texture on a painting like this, and I wanted to run paint over the top of it, then the direction that I hit it might be a little bit more important. But right now it doesn't matter. So let's do that layer of white. Any questions so far? You guys are quiet out there. Mesmerized by the encaustic medium, I guess, huh? It is a really, really magical medium, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon, so we'll see. All right, so now we're going to heat again. You won't see it opening up as you did before. Looks like I got a little bit of schmutz on there. Let me get that off. So some of the tools that I use for the encaustic medium are, and we'll get to this soon, but these are just a small example of some of the tools that I use, really similar to the kind that you would use for carving into clay. Some of them might remind you of your dentist appointment this week, and then this is just an X-Acto knife, and this is a scraper. So I will either use this or a razor blade. So those are some of my basic, hang on a minute, we're just gonna wait because it's really loud. All right, so I was gonna get that little bit off. So sometimes little bits get on your wax. So before I fuse it, I'm going to go ahead and get that junk off of. If it's wax and it's color and I don't care, I can just fuse it right in. But if it's like a little chunk of something, I don't want that. It's a lot easier to get it out when the wax is kind of solid like this. Oops, I'm having a little problem with focus. Maybe because it's white. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse this now. Okay, still a little bit of an opening, but that's okay. So I'm going to wait for this to cool just a little bit, and then I'm going to go in with some color. And you'll see again that kind of spreading and that opening that we saw earlier between the white and the clear encaustic medium. And that's part of that whole really beautiful effect that you can start playing with once you start moving the paint around, shifting it, mixing the colors, and kind of making cool designs. So let's see, what color am I going to do next? So I can start, when you start painting on your board, you don't have to paint just one color. I can get in here and paint several colors. I just don't want to be overlapping them. Oops, got a little messy. That's normal for me. So I'm going to come in here with a couple of colors. And you can see some of the paints are more translucent and some of them are a bit more opaque. And that has to do with the ratio of clear encaustic medium to the pigment. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse this. Now what I do, once I start getting into color, I do two things, and this is something that I teach as well. The first thing that you want to do when you're getting into making out your design and adding color is that when you go to fuse, when you're going into heat, you want to fuse to set first, meaning I want to heat this only to keep them in the original shape and in the placement that I put them in when I painted them. That's the first step. I want to fuse to set them because I want to make sure that it's grabbing that surface area underneath, and I want to make sure that that maybe my lines don't move or whatever. I just want to see where everything is at once I've fused it. Then, after I'm satisfied, then I will move in and start fusing to shift. Fuse to set, and then fuse to shift. Fuse to shift is just like what it sounds like. That means I'm going to start moving the paint in different ways over the surface, blending it with those colors underneath. You'll see those colors start to lift from the base and start melding with the colors on top. All right, so first I'm going to fuse to set. They will shift just a little bit because they are in a molten form, but I'm not going to be too concerned with that. I just want to get these fused in place. Watching those brush lines disappear. And I've gotten pretty lucky. This one doesn't have a lot of air holes popping up, which is nice. All right. So there, I've fused to set. The colors are set onto that last layer that I put on of the white. And now I'm going to fuse to shift a little bit. I'm going to start to move those layers. You're going to see the wax, the paint start to open up to the white underneath. And I can change the direction of my torch. Like I said before, it's blowing heat and air, so it's going to move that wax in the direction that I'm blowing it. There I'm getting some really beautiful lines, or beautiful sections where the white is coming up through the color. So I'm going to just stop. So while I'm fusing to shift, I want to just stop and see what the paint's going to do. This is a really good way to determine how level your surface area is as well. If everything's running to one side versus the other, it looks like I've got some sort of a downward shift going on here. So if I want to stop that, I might want to spin my board. It looks like my paint is still pretty hot. Oops, still pretty hot. If I wanted to move it quickly and cool it quickly, I can just blow on it. And that will make it set still wherever I've put it. So there is, so I've got a little bit of a ridge here. I'm going to go ahead and flatten that out. I'm going to try and keep this pretty smooth and flat. Got a little bit of bubbles over here. I'm going to get rid of those. But I'm kind of liking the way that it's looking right now, right? So you saw how beautiful and magic it is when the white pops up through there. So I know I'm supposed to stop at 11. I started talking and I just couldn't stop. But there you've seen the blend. I do just quickly want to show you some of the tools that I use. And please, if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. Again, you guys are really quiet and you're great listeners, but I would love to talk with you too. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a board that I've already got that is not quite so warm as this one to show you some of the carving tools that I have. And we can always come back to it on a later date and we can talk more about texture, but this is kind of one of the really cool things too. So this is a board that I had used for a demo earlier. I'm going to just warm it a little bit first. I know I said I didn't want to use the other one, but it's just too hot. It won't carve correctly. So I'm going to use just one of my cutting tools to get to some of the surface area underneath and get some lines. And so you can see some of that really pretty color underneath. So this is just really kind of a fun thing to do. Sometimes you forget what you've got underneath if you've put down a lot of color. So just carving lines can really create a special look to the painting. Or I might opt to, where's my recycling thing? I don't see it. Anyway, I might go ahead and fill those lines. So if you can stay with me just a few more minutes, I'm going to go ahead and fill these. So I can fill these lines with the Encaustic paint. So you can see I went outside the lines. I colored outside the lines here, but that's not a problem because what I can do is I can take my scraping tool then and carefully scrape off the excess that I got outside the line. And then I'm going to end up with this really beautiful, clean, I got to wait for it to cool a little bit. It's still a little hot. But it should end up with this really nice clean line. There we go. I was just in a rush. Couldn't wait to clean it up for you. So you'll see me taking the excess wax that I'm scraping off and I'm kind of putting it to the side. I'm actually able to recycle the used encaustic paint. I put it all into color sorted jars and remelt it and reclean it, and then I'm able to make lots of new color. Normally they're shades of grays or browns, but always good to recycle when you can. Every once in a while, now that I'm sorting my colors, I do luck out from time to time and get a pretty pink or purple color. So there you see, I've scraped that off and I end up with this really beautiful clean line that if I filled it one more time, I didn't quite put enough paint in there, but I'll end up with a nice flush line. Another thing I can use to fill it is oil pastel. And then, for wrong color. Oil pastel is nice and soft and it blends really nicely with the encaustic medium, and in this case I'm just going to kind of run the oil pastel there, and I'm going to use my finger to spread it through the texture. And again, I'm coloring outside the lines. My gosh, I just can't help myself. But that's okay because I can clean that up using a paper towel. Using a paper towel and a little bit of baby oil. Thank you, Suzanne, for coming. It looks like you have to get going. I really hope that we will have future sessions. She's saying that she's looking forward to future sessions, so hopefully that will be the case. So I'm just putting a little dab of the baby oil onto the paper towel, and then I can just rub that surface area and it'll clean it right up. Still keeping that that oil pastel in that line. So the third way that I can fill that line is using an oil stick. An oil stick is a combination of encaustic paint and oil paint. And when it is dry, it's in this very hard format. And what I would do is I would take a razor blade, which I don't see near me, so I'm going to use my cutting tool, and I would kind of cut a portion of the skin off, revealing the paint underneath it. Now there is still paint on the inside of the lid that I can use. I'm going to go ahead and put a glove on because this is oil paint. I don't want this on my hands. So put my glove on, and I'm going to flip this over, and I can start kind of rubbing that into my line. It's not doing a very good job. Let me get this portion. There we go. So I don't have to really use the pen itself because I've got enough ink in here, enough of the oil stick to get that into the line. Again, to get that surface area off where I went outside the lines, I'd use my little baby oil connection, and I can get rid of that excess oil paint. Red and blue, for some reason, it must have something to do with the pigment, but the reds and the blues tend to want to stain your encaustic paint, but there's ways that you can get around that. So now that these areas are filled in their various ways, I need to fuse it because every layer I put down, whether it's encaustic paint or oil stick or oil pastel, whatever it is, I always need to heat it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fuse it. And you can see I'm going to fuse to set. I don't want to disturb my lines at all. I just want them to sit still in their place. All right, so there, I've fused them to set. Now, if I wanted to, I could go in there and I could fuse to shift. Maybe I want them to look differently, and the different media will act differently in their line. So let's go ahead and do that so you can see that. The encaustic paint kind of will want to sit still. It might move around a little bit. Ooh, look at that. That oil pastel just totally broke apart in there. And the oil stick, what happens with the oil stick most of the time, that was a pretty wide line and I didn't fill it very well, but most of the time what will happen is the walls of the carved line will fall in to the encaustic or to the oil stick and kind of all blend itself in with them. And that is because there is that little bit of encaustic paint in the oil stick. All right, so this process is called intarsia. It's an Italian word and it means to fill in. So we carved the line and we filled it in with different media. So that ends my encaustic demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and pop up the one that we did together here. And so I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you again for joining me for my first ever live stream. We went a little over the time limit. But I'm so glad that you came today, and Barbara, Catherine, Suzanne, Mom Mac, Sherry, Suzanne, Lynn, thank you for being here. I hope that you will join me again at the Encaustic Edge. That is my YouTube channel. And now that I've done this once, I think I can probably do it again. So thanks again. And make sure you check out www.heartfulartists.com. That is the virtual gallery site where I advertised my demonstration today, and I'm also showing some of more of my work there. You can see that. So thank you so much for joining me. If you're in the area and you're interested in taking a class, go to my website at www.mascreation, and you'll see the full list of the classes there. Also, if you liked this, please give me a thumbs up on YouTube. And I think you can subscribe to the channel below. Again, my learning curve is kind of great. And if any of you guys know better than I do, please make a note in the contents here. So yes, I think you can subscribe below, and I will try to let you guys know the next time I'm up and running, and maybe I can make the next one public so that you can just pop in anytime. But I do love the live. I love to chat with you guys and listen to you and hear your thoughts. So thanks again, and have a great afternoon. All right, I gotta figure out how to stop. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.